They tried to break her, so I became the shield.
The sound hit the hall like a blade. It wasn't loud enough to damage hearing. It was loud enough to damage memory. Selka's body locked, every muscle snapping tight. Her breath vanished. Her eyes went unfocused, as if the assembly had dissolved and she was back in a narrow cargo corridor with red lights and people running past her like she didn't exist. Nolan felt her panic through the grip on his arm. It was a small hand, but it carried the full force of a child's certainty that the world was ending again. He didn't flinch. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so the translation drones would struggle to catch it cleanly. "Selka," he said, steady as a hand on a railing, "you're here with me. Look at my mouth. Not the lights, not the room, my mouth." Her gaze jerked, searching, then found his lips. "That sound is a tool," Nolan said. "It's a lie made of noise. It can't take you anywhere." Selka's throat worked. A thin, strangled inhale slipped out like a crack in ice. "Good," Nolan said immediately, reinforcing it before her brain could decide it didn't count. Again, in, slow. But the alarm continued, a pulsing scream, measured and cruel, designed to keep her nervous system on the edge of collapse. Nolan counted softly. 1, 2, 3. Selka tried to follow. Her shoulders shook. A second breath came, still shallow but present. Nolan shifted, placing his body fully between Selka and the device. He wasn't blocking sound. He was blocking sight. In trauma, sometimes sight was the switch. He raised his left hand, not to stop anything, not to demand, but to make a small, unmistakable human gesture. An open palm, calm, unthreatening. The gesture was for Selka. It was also for the hall. Across the vast chamber, hundreds of faces watched. Delegates from species that didn't share biology, language, or history, all aligned in one primitive fascination. Will the human break? Hollis stood with her chin lifted, eyes bright with anticipation. Terran's posture was a weapon that hadn't been fired yet. Nolan kept counting. Selka's breathing found a rhythm fragile as glass. In, out, in, out. Each breath was a choice. He heard it then, something beneath the alarm. A low murmur rolling through the tears. Not admiration, not outrage, calculation. Because the assembly wasn't watching a child being tested anymore. They were watching the adults reveal themselves. Hollis lifted her hand as if to increase the intensity. Nolan didn't move his eyes from Selka. He spoke with the same calm tone, but louder now, letting the translators do their job. "Counselor Hollis," he said, "turn it off." But Hollis smiled. "Why?" she asked sweetly. "Are you failing?" Nolan exhaled slowly, deliberately, and Selka mirrored him by instinct. Then he looked up. His gaze met Hollis's, steady, clinical, almost bored. "I'm not failing," Nolan said. "You are." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the hall. Hollis's smile tightened. "Careful, human." Nolan nodded once. "I am being careful," he said, "with a child." But he turned his head slightly, addressing the assembly without theatricality. "I'm a xenobiologist," he said. "I study living systems. Trauma is a system response. If you want to know whether a bond is real, you don't torture the bonded party in public and call it tradition." But Hollis's eyes flashed. "It is not torture. It is induced panic," Nolan replied. "On purpose, in front of witnesses, for political advantage. That has a name in every species I've met." The robed counselors on the dais shifted. A few delegates leaned forward as if scenting blood. Terran stepped onto the platform, voice controlled but carrying to the far tiers. "The Verani do not test bonds by harming children," she said. "We test bonds by observing protection in real conditions. Hollis is fabricating conditions to create a failure she can use." Hollis's face hardened. "You accuse me publicly, Marshal." "I accuse you accurately," Terran said. Selka's breathing stuttered again at the raised voices. Nolan turned back to her, lowering his tone. "Stay with me," he said. "You're doing it, you're winning." Selka blinked, and for a moment Nolan saw her mind clawing its way out of the memory. Her gaze shifted from the lights to his face, anchoring again. "Good," Nolan said. "One more breath." Selka drew it in, slow, trembling, real. Hollis's hand rose higher. The alarm's pitch began to climb. That was the moment Taryn moved. Not toward Hollis, toward the device. Two security officers stepped in reflexively, but Taryn's station-recognized credentials flashed on her wrist console, and she didn't slow. She placed her palm against the emitter housing and spoke one word in Vairani, flat, authoritative. The device shut down. The silence that followed was so sudden it felt like a vacuum. Selka collapsed against Nalan's side, shaking, breath now coming in uneven sobs of relief. Nalan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, keeping his touch firm and steady. He didn't shush her. He didn't tell her to be brave. He didn't demand composure for the audience. He let her be a child whose nervous system had survived. Hollis stared at the dead device as if Taryn had slapped her. "You interfered," Hollis said, voice tight with fury. "You sabotaged the assembly's test." Taryn turned slowly. "I prevented a crime," she said. Hollis laughed once sharp. "A crime," she echoed, dramatic. Nalan stood, keeping Selka close at his side. He looked out across the hall. Then he did the one thing Hollis hadn't prepared for. He asked a question instead of making a speech. "To the Unity Assembly," Nalan said evenly, "how many of you were told this was a harmless tradition?" A ripple moved, heads turned. Translators whispered. Nalan raised his hand slightly, palm open again. "How many of you," he continued, "were told this was for the child's safety?" More murmurs, more shifting. He pointed, not at anyone specifically, but at the logic hanging in the air. "If this was for Selka's safety," Nalan said, "why did no medical authority review the procedure? Why was her mother's consent not required? Why was neutral station oversight waived until a human suggested it yesterday?" Hollis's expression stayed composed, but her eyes were burning now. The older robed counselor spoke from the dais, voice measured, carrying the weight of institution. "Counselor Hollis," she said, "did you authorize this device without medical clearance?" Hollis lifted her chin. "I authorized a cultural verification," she said. "The human is manipulating you with human sentiment." Nalan's voice remained calm. "Sentiment is not the issue," he said. "Procedure is, consent is, harm is." Selka's small voice, shaky but clear, drifted into the microphone field of the translation drones. "She wanted me to break," Selka whispered. The hall went very still. Selka lifted her head. Tears streaked down her blue cheeks, catching the light like small stars. "She wanted to see if my shield would leave," Selka said, voice wobbling but stubborn. "But he didn't." Nalan felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't squeeze her. He simply stayed. Taryn's voice came soft, deadly. "My daughter has spoken," she said, "and the assembly has witnessed what matters." The robed counselor's gaze pinned Hollis. "This assembly is adjourned for immediate review," she announced. "Counselor Hollis, you are suspended from custodial proceedings pending investigation." A wave of reaction rolled through the room, shock, approval, outrage, relief, all of it braided together. Hollis's smile returned, but it was wrong now. Brittle. "This is not over," she said, eyes fixed on Nalan. "Humans come and go. Children forget." Selka's grip tightened again. Nalan leaned down close to Selka's ear. "Do you forget?" he asked gently. Selka shook her head hard. Nalan looked up at Hollis, voice quiet enough to be terrifying in its calm. "Then you just lost," he said. Security moved in, not to seize Hollis dramatically, but to escort her with the cold politeness reserved for people whose power had just cracked in public. As the assembly began to disperse, Taryn guided Nalan and Selka off the platform through a side corridor. The air there was dimmer, the noise muffled. Selka's shaking subsided slowly, replaced by exhausted heaviness. She leaned into Nalan, spent. Taryn stopped beside a viewport that overlooked the station's central spine. Stars drifted past like indifferent witnesses. She took a long breath, then looked at Nalan with an intensity that wasn't political now. "You did not give them what they wanted," she said. Nalan's voice was low. "Neither did you." Taryn's gaze flicked to Selka, then back. You could have accepted the mark yesterday and made this easier, she said. You chose the harder path. Nolan shrugged slightly, careful not to jostle Selka. I don't like collars, he said, and I don't like people who put them on kids. Taryn's mouth curved, small, genuine, gone in a blink. Selka will be safe, she said. For now, Hollis will not be able to touch her directly after this. For now, Nolan repeated, understanding the unspoken part. Politics didn't die, it adapted. Taryn watched him for a long moment, then spoke with deliberate precision. The shield bond is real, she said. Not because the council says so, because my daughter's body believes it, because she calms when you are present, because you remain when staying costs you. Nolan's throat tightened, but he kept his voice even. I'm not leaving, he said. Not today, not after that. Taryn stepped closer, and for the first time, the space between them felt like something that could be crossed without permission. You have become visible, she said quietly. To my people, to my rivals, to everyone who watches me. Nolan met her gaze. And you, he said, became visible to me. Taryn's eyes held his, and the discipline in her face wavered, not weakness, but something honest trying to surface. Selka stirred, half asleep, and murmured against Nolan's sleeve. Is my shield still here? Nolan answered without looking away from Taryn. I'm here. Selka sighed, satisfied, and drifted back into sleep like a door closing softly. Taryn's voice dropped to something almost private. You risked your station, your career, your safety, she said, for a child who is not yours. Nolan's answer came simply. She's a child who needed me. Taryn's gaze lowered to Nolan's hand, still holding the small bond disc. Then she reached out, slow and deliberate, and covered his fingers with her own. Her touch was warm, steady. In Verani's stories, she said, a shield does not belong to the state. A shield belongs to the one it protects. She lifted her eyes back to his. And sometimes, she added, the shield becomes family. Nolan felt the words settle between them, heavy with possibility. Outside the viewport, the stars kept moving. Inside the corridor, Taryn didn't let go of his hand. And Nolan realized that the bond Hollis had tried to weaponize had done something Hollis couldn't control at all. It hadn't chained him. It had anchored him. In the days that followed, the station would call it a scandal. The delegation would call it a lesson. The council would call it a mistake to be corrected. Selka would call it simple. He stayed. And Nolan, standing beside Taryn with Selka asleep on his shoulder, understood something he hadn't known he was missing. Not a title, not a mark, a place to stand when the alarm started screaming. Nolan slept in fragments, not because Taryn's quarters were uncomfortable, but because the station never truly went quiet, and his mind refused to stop rehearsing tomorrow's disaster from every angle it could imagine. Near dawn, he woke to a soft metallic click and the faint scent of heated spice. Taryn preparing something in the side alcove that served as a galley. She moved with the efficiency of someone who didn't waste motion, armor plates set aside, wearing a fitted dark uniform instead. Without the metal, she looked no less dangerous, just faster. Selka was still asleep on the low platform, curled around Nolan's sleeve like it was a lifeline she could keep in her hand. Taryn glanced at the child, then at Nolan. You did not leave, she said quietly. Nolan's voice was rough with sleep. I said I wouldn't. Taryn poured a steaming drink into 2 small cups and slid one toward him. It wasn't coffee. It had a sharper mineral scent like roasted herbs and something faintly electric. What is this? Nolan asked. Something that keeps your heart steady, Taryn said. You will need that. Nolan took a careful sip. Warmth hit his tongue, then spread down his throat like a controlled burn. He felt his eyes clear by a fraction. He watched her for a moment, not the armor, not the markings, but the person underneath the discipline. You're not scared for yourself, he said. Taryn's gaze lifted, calm and unreadable. You're scared for her, Nolan added, nodding toward Selka. Taryn didn't answer immediately. She set the second cup down, then reached to adjust Selka's blanket, smoothing it with a gentleness that didn't match the steel in her posture. Fear is useful, she said finally. It keeps you awake. That's not what I asked. Taryn's mouth tightened, then softened by the smallest degree, as if she'd allowed herself a sliver of truth. I have lost people, she said. I do not intend to lose my daughter to politics. Nolan held her gaze. Then we don't, he said. We make their story fail in public. Taryn's eyes narrowed slightly. Humans like public stories, she said. So do Vairani, Nolan replied. Your council wouldn't bother with a stage if they didn't. A soft sound came from the platform. Selka shifted, blinking awake, then immediately searched for Nolan as if checking whether reality had stayed put. When she found him still there, her shoulders loosened. Is it today? She whispered. Nolan nodded. It's today. Selka sat up, braids falling forward. Her face had the serious determination of someone preparing for battle without knowing what battle meant. Do I have to wear the stiff clothes? She asked. Taryn's eyes softened just a fraction. Yes, she said, but I will loosen the collar. Selka sighed like a martyr, then leaned against Nolan's side without asking permission. Nolan let her. The child's trust was heavy, but it was also simple. She didn't care about councils. She cared that the person who stayed once would stay again. Within the hour, a neutral station adjudicator arrived with a recording drone. The adjudicator was human, mid-aged, tired-eyed, and very aware that this was above his pay grade. He brought 2 security officers who kept their hands away from their weapons, as if hoping their bodies wouldn't be noticed. The adjudicator cleared his throat. This is a private vow proceeding, he said, reading from his slate. Between Marshal Adjunct Taryn Voss, her minor dependent Selka Voss, and Dr. Nolan Reyes. The station recognizes this vow as a personal commitment with no legal transfer of custody. All parties acknowledge. Taryn's voice cut in. Speak plainly. The adjudicator blinked. Yes, he said, Doctor. Reyes, you are promising to protect Selka if she is in danger, and to respond to her mother's request for aid when reasonably possible. You are also promising you won't walk out of her life without warning and transition. Nolan looked at Selka. That last part, he said gently, means if I ever have to leave, I tell you, I don't disappear. Selka's eyes widened. You won't have to leave, she said with fierce certainty. Nolan didn't lie to her. He simply said, I won't choose leaving. Taryn's gaze fixed on him, and Nolan felt the weight of that sentence land in more than one place. The adjudicator asked Nolan to speak his vow. Nolan kept it short, because long vows were for people who wanted loopholes. I, Nolan Reyes, promise that if Selka is in danger and I am able to act, I will act, he said. I promise that if her mother asks for my help, I will answer with honesty and effort. I promise I will not harm Selka, will not use her bond for gain, and will not abandon her without transition and care. Selka stared at him as if he'd built a shelter out of words. Taryn spoke next, voice steady. I, Taryn Voss, acknowledge Nolan Reyes as my daughter's chosen shield. I will not permit others to weaponize this bond. I will not demand what he cannot give. I will coordinate with him in matters of Selka's safety. The adjudicator exhaled like a man leaving a minefield. Recorded, he said. This proceeding is complete. Selka didn't wait. She moved forward and took Nolan's hand, then pressed the small disc, the bond marker, into his palm again. Now it's real everywhere, she whispered. Nolan closed his fingers around it. It was real before, he said. But yes, now it's recorded too. Taryn watched that exchange with a quiet intensity. Then she turned, stepped closer, and adjusted Nolan's jacket again, this time adding a narrow strip of dark fabric across his shoulder, fastened with a simple metal clasp. What is that? Nolan asked. A neutral insignia, Taryn said. Not council, not delegation. Station-recognized escort status. It gives you access where you need it. It also makes it harder for them to pretend you don't belong. Nolan's eyebrows lifted. You planned this. Taryn's mouth curved faintly. I plan everything, she said. It is how I keep my daughter alive. They left for the assembly, with Selka between them. The corridors were busier now, filled with officials, aides, guards, and diplomats in fabrics that shimmered with status. Nolan felt eyes track him, some curious, some hostile, some calculating. He focused on Selka's small hand and the steady rhythm of her breathing. The Unity Assembly Hall was a stadium dressed as a temple. Massive arches rose into shadow. Light spilled from high panels like daylight someone had bottled. Rows of delegates sat in tiers, each species clustered in their own patterns. The air vibrated with whispered translations. Hollis was already there. She stood on the central platform in ceremonial armor that caught every beam of light. Behind her, a display projected symbols of duty, tradition, and protection, words that would have sounded noble if Nolan didn't know they were being used as a net. When Terran and Selka approached, a wave of attention rolled across the hall like a physical thing. Then Nolan stepped into view. The murmurs sharpened. Some delegates leaned forward. Some turned to their aides. Nolan saw a few humans in the far tiers stiffen with surprise. Hollis raised one hand. Silence fell in stages. "Today," Hollis announced, "the assembly witnesses a bond that should inspire us and caution us." Her gaze locked on Nolan. "A human stands here claiming the role of shield to a Verani child. A role forged in danger, yes. But danger does not excuse intrusion." Nolan felt Selka's hand tighten. Hollis's voice remained smooth. "We will test whether this human understands what he touches." A panel slid open at the edge of the platform. A small device was brought out, sleek, metallic, and unpleasantly familiar in its shape. Nolan recognized it before anyone said a word. A decompression alarm emitter, a tool used in drills, harmless in function, devastating in implication. Selka went very still, her breathing stopped. Terran's posture changed in an instant, predator-ready, controlled, lethal. Hollis smiled as if presenting a lesson. "A simple sound," she said. "A memory. If this bond is real, the human will stabilize the child. If he fails, the assembly will see the truth." Nolan's stomach turned cold. This wasn't a test of devotion. It was a test designed to re-traumatize a child in front of an audience. Terran's voice cut across the hall, sharp and clear. "You will not." Hollis's smile widened. "You will not stop tradition," she said, "unless you fear what the child will reveal." Nolan felt Selka's body begin to tremble beside him, the first shiver of panic breaking through. He didn't wait. He stepped forward onto the platform, putting himself between Selka and the device without making a show of it. He turned slightly so Selka could see his face. "Selka," he said quietly, voice steady enough to be a railing, "look at me." Her eyes, wide and glassy, found his. "That sound is not the universe ending," Nolan said. "It's a speaker. It can't hurt you. The people using it can, but the sound can't." Selka's lips parted, trying to breathe. Nolan kept his tone calm. "In through your nose," he said. "Slow, out through your mouth, count with me." Selka tried, her breath hitched. Her pupils stayed huge. Hollis lifted her hand. The device began to pulse with a soft pre-tone, the exact frequency Nolan remembered from that corridor 3 months ago. Selka's fingers dug into Nolan's arm. Terran's voice went deadly quiet. "Hollis." Hollis didn't look at her. "Begin," she said. The alarm screamed. Nolan's pulse stayed steady, which surprised him. He'd always assumed politics would feel like heat, raised voices, slammed doors, obvious intimidation. This felt like cold hands placing a collar around your neck while smiling. "A binding ritual," Nolan said, buying time. "You want me to accept a mark I don't understand." Hollis's expression was patient, almost indulgent. "Understanding is not required for loyalty," she said. "Only willingness." Terran's head turned a fraction toward Nolan. He could feel the warning in her posture. This was not a ritual of warmth and family. This was a public lever, a way to turn a human into a handle. The robed counselor, older, silver tracery at her temples, spoke carefully. "The shield mark is a visible acknowledgement," she said. "It signals to our people that you accept the bond's duties. In return, the council formally recognizes you as bonded protection. You gain standing." Hollis's smile returned. "And we gain assurance," she added, "that you will not disappear when it becomes inconvenient." Selka's fingers tightened on Nalan's sleeve again, and Nalan hated how easy it would be to say yes just to calm her. He also hated how expensive yes would become. Taryn's voice dropped. "Nalan," she said, the first time she'd used his name in the chamber, "do not let them force your hand." Hollis's eyes flicked to Taryn, amused. "Force," she repeated. "We offer the human honor." Nalan looked down at Selka. "What do you think the mark is?" he asked gently. Selka swallowed. "It means you're real," she whispered. "It means they can't say you don't belong. It means you're my shield in the stories, not just in my head." The child's honesty hit him like a bruise. Nalan lifted his gaze to the counselors. "If I accept this mark," he said, "what exactly am I agreeing to?" Hollis's eyes gleamed. "At last," she murmured, as if he'd finally asked the right question. The older robed counselor answered, voice neutral. "You agree to act as a bonded protector when summoned. You agree not to harm the child or undermine her household. You agree to comply with the delegation's security directives pertaining to the child." Nalan's mind snagged on the last phrase. "Pertaining to the child is broad," he said. Hollis's smile sharpened. "Children are broad," she said. "They are the future." Taryn stepped half a pace forward. "The mark can be tailored," she said. "It can be sworn to the household only, to Selka and her mother, not to the council." Hollis laughed softly. "How charming," she said. "You want the human as your personal weapon, and deny the state access." Taryn's eyes turned flat. "I want my child protected from people who call leverage protection." The chamber held a breath. Nalan could feel the moment they wanted. The moment he'd choose sides in a way that could be recorded and replayed. He took a slow inhale. "Counselors," Nalan said, and kept his tone calm enough to sound bored. "I will not accept a mark writ by someone who has already tried to use a child as a knife." Hollis's smile vanished. A ripple moved through the chamber, quiet shock, then sharper interest. Nalan felt Selka tense beside him. The second-robed counselor leaned forward. "Dr. Reyes," she warned softly, "mind your language." "I'm minding it," Nalan replied. "I'm a doctor. I deal in cause and effect. Your petition advanced early. Your counsel was waived. Your simple ritual is binding and offers the council compliance. That's not care, that's control." Hollis's voice turned cold. "You are out of your depth, human." "Probably," Nalan said, "but I can still recognize extortion." Taryn didn't move, but Nalan sensed a shift in her. Something like the quiet exhale of a soldier who had been watching a civilian finally pick up the right weapon. Hollis stepped down from the dais, boots clicking softly. Her ceremonial armor caught the amber light and threw it back like a threat. "Then we proceed differently," she said. "If the human refuses the mark, the bond is considered unstable. The child will be relocated to secure housing until such time as the bond is corrected." Selka made a small sound of panic. Nalan reacted without thinking. He crouched to her level and took her small hands in his. "Selka," he said, voice steady, "listen to me." Her eyes were wet again, terrified. "They are trying to scare you because it makes adults easy to move," Nalan said. "You are not an object. You are not a prize. You are a person. And your mother is right here." Selka looked at Taryn as if realizing she'd forgotten to breathe. Taryn's voice cut through the chamber like a blade drawn slow. "My daughter will not be relocated," she said. Hollis's gaze turned predatory. "Then accept the council's authority," she said, "or you will be found negligent." Taryn's eyes didn't flinch. "Then find me negligent," she said, "and watch what happens when I bring this to the Unity Assembly with every recording intact." The robed counselor stiffened. The older one's eyes narrowed, not at Taryn but at Hollis, as if quietly calculating fallout. Hollis's confidence wavered just a fraction, and Nalan saw it. She'd assumed Taryn would protect her child by surrendering quietly. Taryn was protecting her child by preparing to burn the room down. Nalan stood slowly, keeping one hand on Selka's shoulder. "There is a way forward," he said. The counselor's attention snapped to him. Hollis's lips curled. Now you offer compromise. I offer clarity, Nolan said. You want a mark, I'm willing to make a vow, but not to you. The older robed counselor spoke, cautious. To whom, then? Nolan glanced at Taryn, and for a heartbeat their eyes held. She didn't nod, she didn't give permission, but her silence was a door left unlocked. To Selka, Nolan said, and to her mother, in private. Documented by neutral station authority, not by the council. A vow that I will protect Selka if she is in danger, that I will respond to her mother's request for aid when feasible, and that I will not abandon her without transition. No political compliance clauses, no delegation directives, just the bond as it is meant to be, a shield, not a leash. The chamber went quiet. Hollis's face tightened. You would reduce sacred tradition to a human contract. I would prevent you from weaponizing a child, Nolan said. Selka looked up at him with stunned relief, like she hadn't known adults could say no to monsters politely. The robed counselor exchanged a glance with her colleague. A neutral station authority, she repeated. That would remove the council's direct jurisdiction. Hollis's eyes flashed. Unacceptable. Taryn's voice remained calm. Acceptable, she said. If you reject it, you reveal the truth. This was never about Selka's safety. It was about my silence. The older counselor's expression hardened. Counselor Hollis, she said slowly, the human's proposal is reasonable. Hollis stared at her, then at the other robed counselor. Nolan could almost hear the internal arithmetic. Witnesses, recordings, assembly tomorrow, reputations. Finally, Hollis spoke through her teeth. Very well, she said. A private vow, neutral authority present. But the assembly will still require a public presentation. Taryn's eyes narrowed. A presentation is not a mark. Hollis smiled thinly. No, she agreed. It is a stage. Nolan felt the temperature in the room drop again. They avoided the collar, but the chain was still on the table. The hearing concluded with formalities Nolan barely heard. A station adjudicator was summoned. Terms were recorded. Selka was not taken. As they left the chamber, Selka pressed close to Nolan again, her small hand finding his sleeve as if confirming reality. Taryn didn't speak until they were back in her quarters and the door sealed. Then, for the first time, her shoulders sagged. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to show Nolan what she'd been holding. Selka climbed onto the low seating platform and curled into a tight ball, exhausted from fear. Her eyes still tracked Nolan, unwilling to let him out of her sight. Taryn crossed to Nolan, stopped too close, and spoke quietly. You just made an enemy, she said. Nolan let out a slow breath. I figured. Taryn's gaze moved over his face as if confirming he was intact. Counselor Hollis does not forgive defiance, she said, and she does not lose gracefully. Nolan nodded. Then we don't give her a clean angle, he said. We give her a mess, the kind that makes people hesitate. Taryn's mouth curved, faint and genuine, gone as quickly as it came. You speak like someone who has done this before, she said. I've done it in different rooms, Nolan replied. Hospitals, review boards. People who hide cruelty behind policy don't change much with species. Taryn's eyes softened, and Nolan felt the shift in the air. Danger still present, but now threaded with something else. A respect that wasn't granted easily. Selka's voice came small from the seating platform. Are you staying? She asked, half asleep. Nolan moved to her, crouched, and brushed a stray braid back from her forehead. For tonight, he said. And for tomorrow. Selka's eyelids drooped. Tomorrow is the big room, she mumbled. The stage. Nolan glanced at Taryn. Tomorrow, he agreed. Taryn's gaze met his, steady and heavy. Tomorrow, she said, they will put you in front of the assembly. Nolan swallowed. Let them, he said. Taryn studied him, then spoke in a voice only he could hear. If you stand with Selka publicly, she said, they will assume you are mine. Nolan blinked. I'm not. Taryn lifted a hand, stopping him. Not in the way humans mean, she said. In the way power means. Her eyes held his. And that assumption, she added, can be used against you. Nolan stared at the sleeping child, the small hand still gripping his sleeve even in dreams. Then he looked back at Taryn. "Then we choose our angles carefully," he said, "and we don't blink first." Taryn's expression didn't soften, but her voice did just a fraction. "Good," she said, "because Hollis has already chosen hers." She turned, tapped her wrist console, and projected a short clip into the air. A recorded message, flagged for public release. Nolan watched the hologram play. Counselor Hollis, calm and immaculate, addressing a camera. "Tomorrow," the translation rendered smoothly, "the Assembly will witness an unprecedented event. A human attempting to bind himself to the destiny of a Vairani child. For the sake of our people's security, we will test whether this bond is noble or a foreign intrusion." The clip ended. Nolan felt his stomach tighten. Taryn's voice was quiet. "She is making you a spectacle," she said, "and she is making my daughter the bait." Selka slept unaware. Nolan's jaw set. "Then tomorrow," he said, "we stop being polite." Nolan did the math automatically. 1 hour meant they weren't giving Taryn time to call allies, prepare documents, or pull rank the way rank was meant to be pulled. It was an ambush dressed in procedure. Taryn accepted the notice without flinching. "A preliminary hearing requires counsel," she said, voice calm enough to be a weapon. "You will provide a list of approved advocates." The security officer swallowed. "The council has waived external counsel for preliminary review." "Of course they have," Taryn said. Selka made a small, strangled sound and pressed into Nolan's side. Nolan felt her trembling through the fabric of his jacket. "Hey," he murmured, bending slightly so his voice stayed private. "Look at me." She did. Her golden eyes were wide and wet. "You're not going anywhere," Nolan said. "Not in an hour, not today." Selka held onto that sentence like it was a rope over a cliff. The delegation aides avoided looking directly at Nolan, which was its own kind of confirmation. He wasn't supposed to be standing in Taryn's doorway. He wasn't supposed to be part of this. The fact that he was made people uncomfortable. Taryn closed the door with controlled precision, then stood still for half a heartbeat. Nolan watched her shoulders rise and fall once, as if she had allowed herself a single breath of something unarmored. Then she turned back to them. "Selka," she said, "go to the inner room. Now." Selka hesitated, eyes flicking to Nolan. Nolan crouched and put his hands gently on her shoulders. "Do what your mother says," he told her. "I'll be right here." Selka nodded reluctantly and padded into the dim back room. The door slid shut behind her, leaving Nolan and Taryn alone in the warm amber light. Taryn looked at him with the expression of someone deciding whether to hand a civilian a loaded tool. "You are about to be questioned," she said. "Not about your intentions, about your usefulness." Nolan's mouth tightened. "I'm not useful," he said. "I'm inconvenient." "Inconvenient people get removed," Taryn replied. "Useful people get managed. They are trying to decide which you are." Nolan ran a hand over his face. The exhaustion was still there, but now it had a clean edge like a scalpel. "What do I do?" Taryn stepped closer. Up close, the pale tracery on her face looked less like decoration and more like something earned. "You tell the truth," she said, "but you tell it with structure. You do not improvise with emotion. You do not apologize for protecting my child. You do not frame yourself as a bystander. You were her shield. Own it." Nolan exhaled. "You want me to sound like you." "I want you to survive," Taryn said. For a moment the silence between them wasn't political. It was something else. Two adults standing over a child-sized crack in the floor trying to keep the world from widening it. Nolan nodded once. "Okay," he said. "Structure, truth. No apologies." Taryn's gaze held his, steady and assessing. Then she reached out, slow enough that Nolan saw the decision in it, and adjusted the collar of his station jacket. A small, practical motion. Except it wasn't just practical. It made Nolan very aware of how close she was, and how carefully she controlled every inch of herself. "There is one more thing," Taryn said quietly. "They will attempt to provoke you. If you become angry, they will call you volatile. If you become frightened, they will call you weak. And if I stay calm, Nolan said, they'll call me calculating. Taryn's mouth curved by the smallest degree. Yes, she said. Welcome to politics. They left the quarters with Selka between them, holding Nolan's sleeve with one hand and Taryn's fingers with the other. The child's grip made a chain, as if she believed the bond could be measured in contact. The delegation corridor outside had changed. It was the same architecture, the same warm lighting, but now it felt watched. People moved differently. Conversations stopped when they passed. By the time they reached the council chamber, Nolan's name had already traveled ahead of him. The chamber doors were tall, dark metal with embedded seams that glowed faintly as they opened. Inside, the room was circular, designed so no one ever had the comfort of a corner. Tiered seating rose around a central dais. The air tasted faintly ionized, as if security systems had been activated and then politely lied about it. At the center stood 3 counselors, Verani, all of them. 2 wore formal robes with understated insignia. The third wore armor like Taryn, but the style was ceremonial, sharp and theatrical. That one stepped forward. Marshal Adjunct Voss, she said. Her translator delivered her voice as silk wrapped around a blade. And the human. Nolan resisted the urge to glance back at the door. Taryn didn't bow. She didn't bristle. She simply inclined her head by the minimum required for civility. Counselor Hollis. So there was the face of it. Nolan stored the name without wanting it. Counselor Hollis's eyes dropped to Selka, and something like satisfaction flickered across her expression. Child, she said, you have invoked an external shield bond. Selka tightened her grip on Nolan's sleeve. Taryn's voice cut through the space. My daughter is not on trial. Hollis smiled. No, she said, but the bond is. And bonds shape futures. One of the robed counselors spoke next, tone more measured. Dr. Nolan Reyes, he said, you are here because a minor under our protection has publicly declared you her shield. This council must determine whether that declaration constitutes risk. Nolan kept his posture neutral, shoulders relaxed. He'd testified in ethical review boards before. Different species, same predatory hunger for a mistake. Understood, Nolan said. State your involvement with the child, the counselor said, briefly. Nolan nodded. 3 months ago there was a decompression alarm near Cargo Ring C, he said. During the evacuation I heard a child crying. She was separated from her guardian and unable to reach the shelter. I stayed with her until her mother arrived. Hollis tilted her head. You stayed, she repeated, when your own survival was uncertain. It didn't feel uncertain, Nolan said. It felt wrong to leave. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Nolan heard it and let it pass like background noise. The robed counselor leaned forward slightly. Did you understand Verani bonding customs at the time? No, Nolan said. I still don't understand all of them. Hollis's smile widened. Then you admit ignorance, she said. And yet you now seek standing beside a Verani child. Nolan met her gaze without hardening. I'm not seeking standing, he said. I was asked to come because Selka is distressed. I'm here because her mother came to my door and told me her child needed me. Taryn's eyes flicked to him, just once, approval restrained, Hollis's gaze sharpened. And do you intend to comply whenever the child calls? She asked. Even against your station duties, even against the delegation's orders. Nolan felt the trap. If he said yes, he became unreliable and insubordinate. If he said no, he became an abandoner. He kept his voice calm. I intend to act like a responsible adult, he said. If Selka is in danger and I am able to help, I will help. If she is not in danger, I will coordinate with her mother. I am a doctor, counselor. I respond to urgency. I don't respond to theatrics. A few quiet breaths. The room held still. Hollis's eyes narrowed. You presume to define danger for a Verani child. No, Nolan said. I presume to define danger as a living being who has watched a child shake in terror while the lights turn red. Selka's hand eased, just a fraction, as if the words had unclenched something inside her. The second robed counselor spoke, voice softer, almost sympathetic. Child, she said to Selka, Why did you invoke the bond now? Selka looked up at Taryn first, then at Nalan. Her voice came small but steady. Because I heard the bad noise again, she said. And when the bad noise comes, people say I have to go away so Mother can be strong. Nalan felt Taryn's whole body go rigid beside him. Hollis's smile returned, satisfied. There, she said, you see, the child is being influenced. The human's presence has destabilized her. Taryn's voice turned dangerously quiet. My daughter is not destabilized, she said. She is being threatened. Hollis spread her hands as if offering reason. Then prove it, she said. We will grant the human one opportunity to demonstrate the bond is not a liability. Nalan's stomach tightened. What kind of opportunity? Hollis's eyes gleamed. A verification, she said. A simple ritual acknowledgement, public, recorded. If he is truly her shield, he will accept the mark. Nalan glanced down at Selka. The child looked up at him, hope and fear fighting in her face. Taryn's voice was flat. That ritual is not simple. Hollis's smile didn't move. No, she agreed. It is binding. Nalan felt the room tilt, just slightly, as the real shape of the trap revealed itself. They weren't deciding if he was a threat. They were deciding whether they could chain him. Nalan changed fast, not because he respected ceremony, but because he respected the kind of danger that wore armor and stayed calm. He traded his lab coat for a plain dark shirt and a station jacket with no insignia. He pulled his hair back, checked his pockets for anything sharp or stupid, then stepped back into the corridor. Taryn was exactly where he'd left her, posture unmoved. Selka stood closer to her now, as if the 5 minutes had cost her courage and she'd had to borrow more from her mother. When Nalan locked his door, Selka's eyes followed the motion with intense focus, the way a child watched a magician's hands. Then she looked up at him as if confirming he hadn't vanished. I'm here, he said gently. Selka nodded once, satisfied. She reached out, hesitated, then took the edge of his sleeve between 2 fingers like it was a tether. Taryn noticed. Nalan saw it in the smallest shift of her gaze. She didn't comment. She didn't correct the child. But the muscles along her jaw eased, and that was its own kind of permission. They moved. The delegation tier sat higher in the station's spine, where the hull curve made corridors feel cathedral-wide. The air was cleaner there, filtered more aggressively, and even the lighting had a richer spectrum that made human skin look healthier. Nalan noticed those details because he'd spent enough time in sterile environments to recognize luxury when he walked through it. No one stopped them at the first checkpoint. Taryn's credentials did the talking. The guard who scanned them stiffened when he read her rank, then went unnaturally still when his eyes fell on Nalan. Nalan pretended not to see. Selka pressed closer to his side as they passed through. Do people stare at you a lot? Nalan asked her quietly. Selka blinked, then answered with earnest seriousness. Not when Mother is beside me. That was one of those child truths that hit harder than it should. They took an elevator that hummed like a restrained animal, then walked a corridor lined with sealed doors and discreet security nodes. Nalan's fatigue tried to creep back in, but his brain kept tripping over Taryn's earlier words. It is a story, and it is also a weapon. What scared her again? Nalan asked, keeping his voice low. You said she was frightened. Is there a medical issue? Nightmares? A stress response from the decompression alarm? Taryn's eyes remained forward. Not a medical issue, she said, and not only nightmares. Selka's fingers tightened on Nalan's sleeve. She heard something, Taryn added, and when she hears it, she believes she is going to be taken. Nalan felt his stride slow. Taken by who? Taryn didn't answer until they reached her door. The panel recognized her biometrics and opened with a soft sigh. The quarters beyond were dimmer than human residential standards, lit by warm amber bands along the floor and walls. The air carried a faint metallic spice, not unpleasant but unfamiliar. The furnishings were low and angled, designed for longer limbs and a different center of gravity. On one wall, geometric patterns were inlaid in dark metal and pale stone, repeating in a way that felt both artistic and mathematical. Selka stepped inside first, then froze, as if the room itself held memories. Nalan followed, careful not to crowd her. Taryn entered last and sealed the door behind them. The lock engaged with a sound that was quiet but final. Selka stared at Nalan for a long moment. Then she did something that made his chest tighten in a way he didn't like acknowledging. She threw her arms around his waist with full-bodied certainty. "You came," she said, voice muffled against his jacket. "You came when I called." Nalan knelt automatically and rested a hand between her shoulder blades. Her small frame was tense, vibrating with held-in fear that had nowhere to go until now. "I didn't know you were calling," he said, "but I'm here now." Selka pulled back just enough to look at his face. Her eyes were too bright, the way a child's eyes got when they'd been trying not to cry for too long. "You're supposed to be," she said. "That's how it works." Taryn stood a few paces away, watching with the stillness of someone who had spent the last 3 days carrying the weight of a storm without letting it touch her child. Nalan realized with a slow internal shift that Taryn's composure wasn't cold. It was discipline. It was love that had learned to wear armor. Selka's breathing steadied. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. She still held Nalan's jacket as if he was a door she could keep closed. "Okay," Nalan said softly. "Show me what you've been doing. Your mother said you've been upset. I'd like to understand." Selka led him toward a low table scattered with slate panels, styluses, and small carved tokens that looked like pieces from a board game. She picked up one token, a thin disc with a notch along the edge, and placed it in Nalan's hand. It was warm, as if it had been held a long time. "My shield," Selka said. Nalan looked down. "This is your shield." She shook her head, impatient with the limitation of words. "No, this is the story of it, the part that fits in a hand." Taryn's voice came from behind them. "It is a bond marker," she said. "A child's teaching tool. We give them something physical when the concept is too large." Nalan rolled the disc between his fingers. The notch caught against his thumb like a deliberate cue. "And she thinks I'm, what, her shield?" Selka nodded hard. "You stood in front of me," she said. "When everyone ran, you made yourself bigger so the bad noise couldn't reach me." Nalan's throat tightened. He remembered crouching in that access bay. He remembered how small she'd been, how her whole body had been shaking. He remembered thinking, irrationally, that if he could keep one child calm, maybe the universe wouldn't feel so cruel that day. He hadn't expected the universe to remember. Taryn moved closer and lowered herself onto a seat opposite them. Up close, Nalan could see fine scars along the edges of her pale facial markings. Not disfigurement, history. "Doctor." "Raise," she said. "Nalan, you need to understand what happened after the decompression incident." Nalan kept his eyes on the disc. "I'm listening." In Vairani culture, when an outsider places themselves between a child and lethal harm, the child may declare the shield bond, Taryn said. "It does not happen often. It is not granted lightly. And when it is declared in public, it becomes recognized by our delegation as a formal tie." "Formal," Nalan repeated carefully. "As in ceremonial." "As in political," Taryn corrected. Selka frowned. "Not political," she said, offended. "It's real." Taryn's gaze softened as it passed over her daughter. "It is real," she agreed, "which is why others seek to use it." Nalan felt the cold clarity return. "Who?" Taryn didn't answer immediately. She reached to a side table and lifted a slim data slate, then placed it on the low table between them. The screen displayed a translated notice. "Official formatting, station seal, delegation header, petition for custodial review, minor under EXTRADLEGTIONARY bond." Nalan stared at the words until they stopped being words and became a threat. "What is this?" he asked. Taryn's voice stayed level, but something in it sharpened. "A faction within our council believes Selka's bond to a human is a vulnerability," she said. "They argue she should be moved to secured housing and assigned a bonded guardian from within our own ranks. Someone controllable, someone who can be ordered." Selka's face went pale under blue skin. Her fingers seized Nolan's sleeve again hard. "They can't," Nolan said. "You're her mother." "In law, yes," Terran said. "In our internal protocol, a publicly invoked shield bond creates a right of review. They can claim it is for her protection. They can claim I have allowed a foreign variable too close to my child." But Nolan's mind raced through possibilities and hated all of them. "Why now?" he asked. "Why would they care now, 3 months later?" Terran's eyes held his, unwavering. "Because tomorrow I am scheduled to speak before the Unity Assembly," she said. "And my opposition does not want me to speak with credibility." Nolan let the pieces settle. A marshal, a delegation, a speech. A faction looking for leverage. A child with a bond that could be framed as weakness. "You're telling me they're using your daughter," Nolan said. Terran's mouth tightened. "They are using my daughter," she confirmed. "And they are using you." Selka's breathing hitched. Nolan turned toward her, lowering his voice. "Hey," he said, "look at me." She did, eyes wide. "I'm here," he said. "No one is taking you while I'm here." Selka clung to him like that sentence was oxygen. Terran watched him steady her, and Nolan caught a flicker in her expression that wasn't armor. It was something raw and quiet. Gratitude, maybe, or relief sharp enough to hurt. "Nolan," Terran said, "there is one way to cut the petition at its knees." He looked up. "Tell me." "Attend the assembly," she said. "Publicly acknowledge the bond. Stand at Selka's side when she is presented. If the assembly sees you as an honorable shield rather than an unknown liability, the petition loses force." Nolan stared at her. "I'm a doctor, a lab rat with a badge. I don't belong in an interspecies assembly." "You belong because my child named you," Terran said simply. Selka looked between them. "You have to," she whispered. "If you don't, they'll make Mother send me away." Nolan felt the full weight of a promise he'd never meant to make. He set the disc on the table with care. "Okay," he said, more to himself than to either of them. "Okay, we'll do it the right way." Terran's shoulders eased just slightly. "And if I refuse?" Nolan asked, because he needed to know the shape of the cliff even if he planned not to step off it. Terran's gaze turned hard again. "If you refuse," she said, "they will call it abandonment. And in our culture, abandonment of a declared shield is not just shameful." She paused. "It is grounds for removal of you from the station." Nolan swallowed. Somewhere beyond the sealed door, the station hummed on like nothing had changed. Then a chime sounded at Terran's entry panel. Soft, polite, official. Terran didn't move for a full second. Her eyes went to the door the way a soldier's did when they already knew the answer. Selka's fingers dug into Nolan's sleeve. Terran rose in one smooth motion and crossed to the panel. She opened the door. A station security officer stood there with 2 delegation aides behind him. The officer's posture was careful in the presence of Terran's rank, but his voice carried the weight of procedure. "Marshal Adjunct Voss," he said. "Dr. Nolan Reyes." Nolan's name in that hallway felt like a bell being rung. "You are both hereby served notice," the officer continued. "The Custodial Review Council has advanced the petition. The preliminary hearing has been moved up." He glanced down at his slate. "It begins in 1 hour." The first time Nolan Reyes saved an alien child, he didn't even learn her name. 12 hours under lab-white lights had turned his thoughts into slow-moving syrup. The last of the shift's specimens sat sealed in a cryo rack, tagged and logged, and his hands still smelled faintly of antiseptic despite 2 scrubs and an industrial hand dryer that could have taken paint off a bulkhead. Asterian Spire never really slept. It only dimmed, like a city that refused to admit it was tired. Nolan cut through a service corridor behind the medical wing, badge chiming at each lock. He passed the night crew, a maintenance tech with a coffee bulb the size of his fist, 2 security officers arguing about whose turn it was to write the incident report. They nodded at him with the weary camaraderie of people who all lived under the same artificial sky. When he reached his residential tier, the hallway lights were lower, warmer. Someone had programmed the ambience to calm, which on a station meant Pretend this is normal. His door was 3 meters ahead when he noticed the figure standing outside it. Not a staffer, not a neighbor, not someone who belonged in this narrow corridor lined with identical quarters. She was tall even by station standards, built with the clean, controlled strength of a professional fighter. Her skin was a deep cerulean blue, marked with thin pale tracery that ran across her forehead and down the edges of her cheekbones like deliberate lightning. Thick purple braids were pulled back from her face and fell over one shoulder in heavy ropes. The armor she wore wasn't parade dress. It was functional, dark plates, angular shoulders, metalwork that caught the light in sharp highlights. A coil of braided gold sat at her neck like a collar that was also a badge. She didn't move when she saw him approach. She simply watched. To Nolan's left, partially hidden by her hip, stood a smaller figure, same blue skin, same purple hair in shorter braids. A child. Young enough that the hallway light seemed too big for her. Nolan's first thought was that he'd gotten the wrong door. His second thought was that he hadn't. His name was still on the placard. His access log was clean. And the woman's gaze had already locked onto him as if she'd been waiting for that moment specifically. "Dr. Reyes," she said. Her voice was low, steady. Her translator rendered it into clean human English, clipped and formal, as if it was designed for courtrooms. Nolan stopped with his hand still in his pocket where his key wafer sat. "That's me," he said carefully. "If this is about the Centauri spore quarantine, I promise you I filed the report on time. That rumor about me sleeping in the lab is only partially true." The child made a small sound, half gasp, half swallowed laugh, then went very still as if afraid she'd ruined something. The woman's expression didn't soften, but something in her eyes shifted. Not humor, recognition maybe, or a calculation that included it. "This is not about your work," she said. "My name is Taryn Voss. I serve as Marshal Adjunct to the Veyrani delegation." That title landed like a weight. Delegation marshals didn't come to residential corridors without reason. They certainly didn't come alone, without escorts, unless they wanted privacy. Nolan's tired brain stumbled over the implications. "Okay," he said. "Marshal, what can I do for you?" Taryn glanced down just once. The child's small hands were clenched in the fabric of her own tunic, knuckles pale under blue skin. "It is personal," Taryn said. "It concerns my daughter." Nolan blinked. "I'm a doctor, not a counselor, I don't." "She has been asking for you," Taryn cut in, and for the first time her composure showed a hairline crack. Not panic. Not pleading. Something worse. A parent who had reached the end of what authority could fix. Nolan's exhaustion sharpened into a clearer kind of alertness. "Me?" he echoed. "I don't think I've met your daughter." The child's eyes lifted to his. They were bright, almost golden, and they held the kind of certainty that made adults uncomfortable. Taryn's jaw tightened. "She has asked for 3 days," she said. "She calls you the kind man. She calls you the one who stayed." Nolan's mouth went dry. Memory slow at first, then sudden. A decompression alarm. The harsh red pulse of emergency strobes. People sprinting. A scream cut short by vacuum doors slamming shut. And in the chaos, a small blue figure wedged between 2 cargo crates near a junction, too small to reach the latch panel, shaking hard enough that her braids had come loose. He'd found her by accident. He'd been running toward a shelter when he'd heard the sobbing. He'd doubled back, cursed his own instincts, and then spent 10 minutes crouched in a half-lit access bay, blocking her from the stampede with his own body, while the station's automated voice counted down pressure loss. Nolan exhaled slowly. 3 months ago, he said, mostly to himself. Cargo Ring C, there was a false breach in the docking collar. Everyone panicked anyway. The child nodded so hard it looked like it hurt. "You told me to breathe," she said, and her translator made her voice slightly higher than it probably was. "You said the lights do mean we're dying. They mean the station is waking up." Nolan stared at her. He hadn't remembered saying that. But it sounded like him. He'd say anything to keep someone breathing. "I stayed with her," he said quietly, turning back to Taryn. until security came and found her mother. I found her, Taryn corrected, and there was steel in that. Because I tore through a sealed corridor to reach her, because she is my only child. Nalan nodded once. He believed her without question. Taryn stepped half a pace closer, the armor whispering softly. Her presence filled the corridor in a way that made the air feel thinner. "You should understand something about my people, Dr. Reyes," she said. "In our law, there are treaties and papers and signatures. In our culture, there are oaths." Nalan's throat tightened. "I didn't make any oath," he said. "You did not speak the words," Taryn agreed. "You performed the act." The child's fingers loosened from her tunic. She took a small step forward, as if there was an invisible line in the air she'd finally been given permission to cross. "You didn't leave," she said. "Everybody else left." Nalan knelt, because standing suddenly felt like towering. His knees creaked in protest. He was too tired for dignity. "I didn't leave," he repeated. "That's true." The child looked at him with solemn intensity, the way children did when they were assigning meaning to something adults thought was small. "My name is Selka," she said, "and you are supposed to come when I call." Nalan's heart gave a stupid, painful little lurch. He glanced up at Taryn, expecting explanation. What he saw instead was something like restraint under pressure, an adult holding back a tidal wave because she couldn't afford to drown in it. "She has invoked what we call the shield bond," Taryn said softly. "A child's bond to the one who protected her when death was possible." Nalan's stomach turned. "That sounds ceremonial," he said, trying for light and missing, "like a storybook thing." "It is a story," Taryn said, "and it is also a weapon." That made Nalan go still. Taryn's gaze flicked down the corridor, one quick check, professional, as if she expected someone to appear at any second. "She spoke the bond in the presence of witnesses," Taryn continued. "In the delegation hall, in front of people who now believe you have a place at my daughter's side." Nalan felt the walls of his narrow hallway press closer. "Why would she do that?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Children didn't do politics, they did need. Selka's chin lifted. "Because I was scared again," she said simply, "and nobody could fix it." Nalan looked from the child to the marshal in armor and back again. Whatever this was, it was bigger than a tired doctor and a forgotten moment in a flashing corridor. He swallowed. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Taryn's shoulders eased by a fraction, as if the question itself was a door unlocking. "I need you to come with us," she said, "to speak to my daughter, to calm her, and then we will discuss what the bond means and why it was invoked now." Nalan's instincts screamed for a dozen clarifying questions. He wanted to ask who the witnesses were. He wanted to know what danger could frighten a marshal's child on a fortified diplomatic station. He wanted to know why Taryn had come alone instead of sending a liaison. But Selka's eyes were fixed on him with absolute trust, and that trust was a heavier thing than protocol. Nalan rose slowly. He turned, pressed his palm to his door panel, and let the lock chirp open. "I need 5 minutes," he said, "to change out of biohazard chic." Selka's mouth curved, tiny and relieved. Taryn's expression didn't change, but her voice softened by a shade. "5 minutes," she agreed. Nalan stepped inside, and as the door slid shut behind him, he realized with a